First one, and that the visit shall be assessed at a public will consist of presentation and defense in the presence of examining board members of the research work carried out by the doctoral student. Doctors attending the public session may formulate questions within the time and in the manner indicated by the examining board chair. Also, the examining board shall issue both a report and the overall grade granted the thesis according to the following scale: fail, pass, very good, and excellent. The examining board may propose the thesis to be awarded of the mention cum laude if the overall grade is excellent, and a unanimous positive secret vote is cast to this effect. They involve the necessary mechanisms to materialize the final concession of the aforementioned award, ensuring that the votes for this honor are counted in a different session from that corresponding to the defense of the doctoral thesis. That said,
okay, thank you, members of the committee. Thank you also, the public, for attending my PhD defense today. I'm going to summarize the main...
I don't hear you anymore, Danielle. Maybe you have the
microphone? Okay, just to make sure, I am testing right now. Can you hear me, Luca?
Yeah, no, it's good.
Okay, so as I was saying, I'm going to summarize the main research questions and contributions of my doctoral work. In this case, this thesis is structured as follows. I'm going to delve into the introduction, to the hypotheses and aims of the research, and then I'm going to introduce the results, which are organized into 4 different articles, and they are aligned with the research aims and hypotheses. Then I'm going to summarize the conclusions, the discussion, and future lines of the present research. Without further ado, let's begin. About 18 million people die by cardiovascular disease every year. What makes this so critical is that many of the physiological alterations behind them develop silently over long periods of time. They often go unnoticed until first symptoms appear, treatment is less effective, and opportunities for prevention are lost. So, if early alterations remain silent, the main question is, which of them makes the greatest impact on patients? And that naturally brings us to atrial arrhythmias. Atrial arrhythmias. More precisely, atrial fibrillation and atrial flutter are among the most common sustained arrhythmias worldwide. They're highly prevalent, and many patients don't know they even have them because these arrhythmias are not detected until a major clinical event occurs. They significantly increase the risk of stroke and heart failure, and yet they remain difficult to detect because of their episodic and sporadic asymptomatic nature. But these arrhythmias rarely occur in isolation. They are influenced by other conditions that shape their onset and progression over time. We are talking about obstructive sleep apnea. This is a highly prevalent and largely underdiagnosed cardiorespiratory disorder that it is now recognized as one of the main risk factors for the aforementioned arrhythmias. So the repeated episodes of intermittent hypoxia and autonomic imbalance during sleep contribute to the initiation and progression of these arrhythmias. However, diagnosing OSA is typically far from being easy because it requires overnight polysomnography. While very accurate, it is not cost-effective, is expensive, time-consuming, and unsuitable for large-scale scenarios. And this reveals a broader issue into cardiovascular medicine. These methods only capture a limited snapshot in highly controlled clinical settings. They require high-end equipment, and as a result, many of these physiological alterations remain undetected simply because we do not record long enough or frequently enough. So it continues and accessible beyond traditional clinical settings, and this is where recent technological developments have changed the landscape. More precisely, in recent years, wearable devices have enabled continuous collection of physiological signals in real-world conditions. Wristbands, smartwatches, and portable ECG monitors can now record for days or even weeks with minimal intrusion at a low cost. And this makes large-scale and preventive cardiovascular monitoring feasible for the very first time, even though more than one device may be required to perform multi-parametric recording, such as in the case of electrocardiogram and fotopletismography. And a key biomarker that actually bridges wearable data with continuously cardiovascular monitoring is heart rate variability. Heart rate variability reflects the continuous modulation of cardiac rhythm by the autonomic nervous system. It captures changes in sympathetic and parasympathetic activity, and it has been linked to conditions such as obstructive sleep apnea and cardiac arrhythmias. More importantly, HRV can be derived from both ECG and PPG signals, making it especially suitable for wearable-based monitoring. So, as recordings become longer and more accessible, the main bottleneck is not only data size, but interpretation. Manual analysis is not scalable anymore, and is strongly affected by variability across patients, sensors, and recording conditions. Therefore, automated and reliable analysis methods are now required. And this is precisely where artificial intelligence becomes essential. By using AI to decode subtle patterns, it becomes possible to perform automated and robust cardiovascular analysis. These so-called cardiovascular footprints often precede overt clinical manifestations. So the aim of this work is therefore to, one, detect obstructive sleep apnea from HRV extracts, but also to predict atrial fibrillation and flutter risk from HRV segments that appear normal to the naked eye. So ultimately, this contributes to a broader vision of the thesis. We want to help move from reactive to preventive cardiovascular medicine. By combining HRV and advanced AI techniques, we aim to support continuous and scalable monitoring systems capable of identifying early physiological threats before major events occur. So this approach brings us closer to accessible and personalized cardiovascular care. And with this motivation in mind, the next step, naturally, is to present our starting hypothesis. Our starting hypothesis has been quite sustained and supported in the literature, which is that heart rate variability encodes clinically meaningful patterns for early detection of cardiac disorders. However, our thesis addresses a more practical question, which is, how do we enable robust, generalizable, and wearable-ready cardiovascular risk analysis using HRV and AI? So, in order to answer this question, this thesis is structured around 4 research pillars, each one aligned with a specific objective and progressively enable the final answer to the research question. So the first one looks for clinical foundation. We have done a review of the generalization ability of the current methods for detecting obstructive sleep apnea during sleep and HRV. The second one looks for methodological advancement. Once we have studied the state of the art, what can we do to propose an improvement to that state of the art? The third step covers a specific topic that has been neglected in the past 30 years, but that is crucial in modern continuous monitoring systems, which is enable real-world deployment by synchronizing 2 of the main signals studied in the state of the art, which are ECG and PPG from different sources of data. And last and most importantly, basically, we want to reach clinical culmination, not only detecting obstructive sleep apnea, but taking a step closer to predicting atrial fibrillation and atrial flutter before it appears. So with these pillars in mind, together they form a coherent and narrative path towards robust and generalizable AI models. So the first study is about review and generalization on OSA techniques. In this case, several HRV-based machine learning approaches for OSA detection have been proposed in recent years, often reporting very high classification performance. However, most of these studies have relied exclusively on internal cross-validation, which typically uses only a single database, most often the Physionet's famous sleep apnea ECG database. This is not wrong per se question, which is, do these models truly generalize to unseen data, or are they learning dataset specific patterns that do not actually transfer to real-world scenarios? That is to say, are we measuring accuracy or generalization ability of the evaluated models? So in order to answer this question, we must recall to the tripod statement. The tripod statement is basically a set of guidelines designed to ensure transparent, complete, and accurate reporting of our classifying models. Although more recent guidelines have been proposed, they share the same core principle of always requiring at least a third database for external validation, which is also recommended by tripod. For clinical deployments, models must remain robust across different populations, sensors, and acquisition systems. Without external validation, performance estimates may be overly optimistic and clinically misleading. Despite its importance, systematic evaluations of external generalization remain scarce, thus relying on single database cross-validation, many of the times even without patient stratifications. This study was therefore designed to explicitly quantify the gap between cross-validation and external validation techniques applied in obstructive sleep apnea detection. How we did that? By following the guidelines of the state-of-the-art, we systematically evaluated the generalization ability of representative traditional machine learning techniques, specifically for OSA detection through HRV features. More precisely, we compare cross-validation within the same dataset with external validation, public ECG and apnea databases. Some of them were the famous sleep apnea ECG, the MIT Beth Israel Hospital, and the University College of Dublin database. The main idea was training one model with a single database and then evaluate the same model with the other ones, so that there was no mixture between patients and acquisition systems, and thus obtaining a less biased kind of results. Findings behind this study were the following. We observed a clear performance drop when models were tested on unseen datasets, around 20% on average. Models presenting around 60 to 70% of accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity in a consistent way demonstrated similar results in line with other works using actually external validation. And these were up to 40% in some cases compared to cross-validation, specifically when using solely apnea ECG as a single source of truth. So based on these results, there are three takeaways that are worth to emphasize from this conclusion, which is single dataset cross-validation alone provides overly optimistic estimates, and most of the times is insufficient for real-world detection applications against the gold standard polysomnography. So the takeaways basically summarize the main contributions of this study, which are cross-validation heavily overestimates performance. As we have seen, we have to 20 to 40% difference between cross-validation and external validation procedures. Secondly, HRV features and feature selection show cross dataset transferability. That is to say, regardless of the feature set we were using, that drop was consistent in different experiments. And last but not least, limited generalization challenges the actual clinical reliability of these modern methods based on HRV features compared to polysomnography. So these findings were published in a peer-reviewed journal with up-to-date 31 citations and acute within the engineering and electrical discipline in IE Access in 2022. These findings were not only isolated experiments, they were refined and discussed in international venues until its final form. What's more, it has been awarded a couple of times, namely in the EHB, in the eHealth Bioengineering Conference, as one of the best young paper awards. One in the first time and a special mention in the second venue. In the first study, we have observed that cross-validation provides overly optimistic estimates when models were trained and evaluated on a single data population. In addition, HRV feature sets commonly used in the literature tend to reach a clear plateau when evaluated under external validation. So this observation suggests that the limitation not only lies in the learning procedures, but also in the HRV representation itself. And this leads to a key question. How should we represent our baseline signal, our heart rate variability? Heart rate variability is not just a sequence of values, but the result of a dynamic driven by autonomic regulation. So to study these dynamics, HRV signals can be represented in a phase space, a mathematical construct where each point describes the system's state over time. Allow me to explain. In this space, temporal evolution becomes a geometric trajectory, allowing us to analyze how the system evolves over time rather than focusing only on isolated measurements on HRV features. This is traditionally denominated recurrence analysis. This mathematical tool is based on a simple idea. If a physiological system, especially biological, is regulated, it will revisit similar states over time. In the phase space, recurrence is measured by computed distances between all pairs of points and instants of time. And this results in distant matrices, which encode how often and how strongly the system returns or revisits the previous states. However, typical recurrence quantification mostly uses a threshold version to study the nonlinear components on the phase space, resulting in binarized representations called recurrence plots. These plots encode how often and how strongly the system returns to previous states. But nevertheless, in this study, we use raw and threshold distance matrices so that it preserves subtle temporal patterns that might be lost during binarization. Beyond their mathematical meaning, these recurrence patterns have a clear physiological interpretation. From a physiological perspective, obstructive sleep apnea is characterized by repeated transitions between sympathetic and parasympathetic activity during sleep. So these alternating activations produce common stationary and nonlinear patterns in HRV that are impossible to see to the naked eye, even in the ECG. So, to automatically learn and exploit such complex recurrence patterns, in this case distance matrices, a data-driven learning strategy is required. Recurrence-based HRV representations were analyzed using image-based deep learning models, such as convolutional neural networks. These models can automatically learn discriminative patterns without relying on manual feature extraction. Also, following the lessons of the previous studies, model evaluation was focused on external validation. So models were trained with two datasets and then tested on a third one, which is unseen at the patient level. So this combination of HRV representation, deep learning, and external validation leads us to several key results. Under external validation, the proposed approach, based on distance matrices and convolutional neural networks, achieved the best performance with approximately 75% of accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity in a consistent way. When using a popular time frequency representation based on continuous wavelet transforms, this performance dropped consistently to around 65% across these metrics of accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity. And of course, traditional machine learning models based on handcraft HRV features performed significantly worse, reaching only about 58 to 60% in stable external validation. These results suggest that the way HRV information is delivered to our classifying models plays a critical role in defining distance matrices. On the one hand, derived from recurrence analysis, preserve the nonlinear and temporal structure of heart rate variability dynamics, which appears to be partially lost when using time frequency representations such as wavelet transforms. In contrast, handcraft HRV features and classical machine learning models rely on predefined descriptors, which may not adapt well to changes in data distribution across datasets. So, some of the main takeaways of this second study will be the following. Representation choice is critical for generalization. As we can see, with nonlinear representation in 2 dimensions, with deep learning techniques, we can improve the external validation of the proposed models. Secondly, recurrence-based representations outperform a method that was broadly used also in the state of the art, which is the continuously wavelet transforms, which basically takes time and frequency features, but automatically extracted by our deep learning models. And last, and most importantly, robust OSA detection is feasible, but modality consistency still remains open. And of course, results are still to be improved with broader datasets and broader ways of representing HRV. So these results were also transferred into a journal article, also Q2, with UpToDate has got 8 citations. The relevance of this study was also broadened with international and national venues, such as in Computing in Cardiology and in the Spanish Society of Bioengineering conference. Up to this point, the thesis has focused on improving the robustness and generalization of HRV-based algorithms. One of the main reasons why HRV is attractive for real-world monitoring is that it can be derived from both ECG and PPG signals, as reported in the literature. However, this assumption needs to be validated, specifically if HRV-based models are to be deployed massively. And this validation becomes particularly relevant in the context of wearable devices. In parallel to this thesis, we have been working on a long-term project focused on continuous cardiovascular monitoring using wearable devices. This system combines ECG recordings obtained with a chest band with wristband devices, allowing for real-time data collection in daily life conditions, in real-world scenarios. So while ECG is considered a clinical reference, PPG offers a higher comfort and accessibility, making it more suitable for large-scale and long-term monitoring. In this context, a key methodological challenge emerged, which is the following. When ECG and PPG are acquired simultaneously using different devices, the signals are not naturally synchronized. So this lack of temporal alignment makes direct comparison difficult in a clinical way. So to address this issue, we have performed another HRV analysis that is actually shared by both signals. Both ECG and PPG encode similar inter-beat interval, despite of their different electrical and hemodynamic nature. By representing ECG-derived and PPG-derived pulse or heart rate variability in the phase space, the distance matrices can be compared using normalized neutral information, allowing for nonlinear relationships between modalities to be captured. This framework allows us to evaluate whether HRV derived from both modalities conveys consistent physiological information. So the main idea was, if the distance matrix of HRV is here that we see to the left, the cross-distance matrices is basically the same idea, but with two different signals. If these two different signals have very, very high similarity in their nonlinear and linear components, it is going to resemblance to the original distance matrices of the heart rate variability captured by ECG. By comparing these two images with normalized mutual information, we can find an optimized comparison curve in order to find the exact time of synchronization of both signals. Or at least, that was the hypothesis. So basically, the construct is made like this. We take as a reference an HRV signal from the ECG, and then we sweep a PRV window over time until we find and maximize the similarity between these two windows. And we do that with different methods in order to compare our nonlinear proposal with other actually proposed, currently proposed in the state of the art. The way to measure the error was simply to compare how far was the new signal compared to the reference HRV. But here synchronization is not used to estimate blood pressure, so we are not looking for pulse transit time, but only to a broad alignment procedure to allow easier cardiovascular analysis during large-scale monitoring. So, to evaluate the effectiveness of the proposed synchronization strategy, several commonly used baseline methods were also considered. These include linear correlation, dynamic time warping, and other classical alignment techniques applied to time series synchronization. So this comparative evaluation allowed us to assess whether modeling HRV dynamics with nonlinear and linear procedures has, in fact, an impact on synchronization itself. Regarding the data, this study combined public and private databases to test the proposed methods. The first one is the PhysioNet's simultaneous physiological measurements database, which included 13 patients recorded with the same exact device at the same sampling frequencies. And the second one is the Estudios Sociosanitarios studies from University of Castilla-La Mancha, in which we acquired 78 patients, and ECG and PPG recordings were thoroughly synchronized in time. So the results behind them show that the proposed nonlinear synchronization approach enabled reliable alignment between ECG and PPG-derived HRV, outperforming classical methods such as linear correlation or even dynamic time warping. Although PPG is affected by peak detection quality, the proposed nonlinear strategy remains robust under the same. It is also worth noting that these databases are both a little bit different in nature as well. This work was developed in collaboration with Professor Dr. Norbert Magwan from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. He leads the time series analysis group and is an expert in nonlinear and recurrence-based time series. His expertise contributed to the methodological validation of the recurrence framework used in this study. So with all of this, some of the main takeaways of these studies are summarized as follows. HRV provides a common physiological space to relate both ECG and PPG. Secondly, alignment does not need to be exact in the context. Pulse transit time is intentionally not modeled here, as the focus is on autonomic dynamics rather than hemodynamic latency. And lastly, nonlinear HRV-based synchronization outperforms classical methods, such as we have seen with linear correlation and dynamic time warping. Also, this latest study has been published not long ago, also in IEQ Access, and nowadays has no citation yet, but at least 303 full-text views up to May 2025. This study was also refined and discussed in several national venues, such as in SAIC in Toledo, URSI here in Cuenca, and again in CASEIF 2025. So far, the thesis has focused on detecting pathological conditions using HRV-based features and on in-world scenarios. However, from a clinical perspective, the greatest impact comes not from detecting, but predicting this behavior. So in this study, the aim is not to detect arrhythmias, but to predict the risk of future AF or AFL episodes during heart rate variability extracts during normal sinus rhythm. So the underlying hypothesis is that early autonomic dysfunction leaves measurable footprints in HRV dynamics before even the arrhythmia onset. So to test this hypothesis, we designed a dual scenario predictive framework. Scenario A represents continuous monitoring, such as wearable devices, providing long HRV recording and dense temporal information. Scenario B represents an opportunistic scenario where only short ECG segments are available, such as routine clinical recordings or sporadic measurements. From a methodological perspective, we evaluated two modeling strategies. First, a traditional machine learning pipeline where HRV were manually extracted and then introduced into our classifiers. And secondly, a deep learning approach where the model automatically learns the relevant representations directly from the HRV dynamics. For the deep learning approach, this time we implemented a multi-source architecture. HRV dynamics were encoded as images mainly using continuous wavelet transforms and distance matrices, such as in the previous work, enabling the network to capture complex temporal patterns. But additionally, ectopic bit statistics were incorporated as complementary features of these models. Two independent databases were used. The Inteligencia database, used for model development and cross-validation, internal cross-validation, and to assess true and biased generalization, the models were then tested on the famous FisioNet atrial fibrillation prediction database, which contains ECG recordings preceding atrial fibrillation episodes. So this setup allowed us to perform a fully independent external validation similar to the lessons learned in previous works, and also following the recommendations of the triple guidelines. Now, the way we model such scenarios in these databases was the following. In scenario A, the model analyzed 30-minute ECG segments in normal sinus rhythm, preceding both atrial fibrillation and atrial flutter episodes. So we had to make a previous research on this database. Whereas in scenario B, we simulated a more realistic screening situation by using only 5-minute segments separated at least 30 minutes from the arrhythmia onset. So the results were that in continuous scenario, in scenario A, deep learning models achieved around 85% of accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity consistently in cross-validation, which dropped only down to 83% in external validation in the external database. Then, of course, traditional machine learning showed a performance drop under external validation as expected, thus demonstrating the lack of generalization ability of traditional machine learning methods against deep learning. Now, in the second scenario, even using 5-minute segments, performance slightly decreased but remained strong, and deep learning achieved around 80% accuracy, while traditional machine learning methods reach only around 68% of accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity consistently. So overall, these results suggest that HRV dynamics during normal sinus rhythm actually leaves a footprint in allowing us to predict the risk of atrial fibrillation and atrial flutter before it even appears. So this final study was conducted during an international research stay at Esta in collaboration with the University of Porto. I personally worked with Dr. Professor João Manuel Pedrosa from Image Lab, the Faculty of Engineering, and Professor Dr. Francesco Renna from the Department of Computer Science, the Faculty of Computer Science. This collaboration contributed to the development and validation of the predictive framework presented in the final study. So, the takeaways of this final study were the following. HRV dynamics during normal sinus rhythm contains predictive information about future AF, atrial fibrillation risk. This means that arrhythmia risk may be estimated before the first clinical episode occurs with pretty high accuracy. And most importantly, these approaches are compatible with wearable-based monitoring systems, which open the doors to large-scale screening strategies, as we are not treating the ECG or PPG morphology, but we are based on the pulse and heart rate variability system. This work is currently under review in Computers in Biology and Medicine. And parts of these results were previously presented at Computing in Cardiology 2024 and the annual conference of the Spanish Society of Biomedical Engineering. Also, the present work was selected, or with partial results, as a finalist for the José María Corral Young Research Award issued by the Spanish Biomedical Engineering Society, which was also an honor to refine this work in this way. Ultimately, this thesis leads to 4 main conclusions. First, single population cross-validation is insufficient to assess the real generalization prediction in AF scenario. Secondly, the way HRV dynamics are represented plays a critical role in predictive performance. Third, HRV analysis is compatible with wearable monitoring, enable large-scale cardiovascular screening if we are based on heart rate variability, instead of the typical waveforms in ECG and PPG. And finally, our results suggest that the early autonomic changes reflected in HRV may reveal future AF risk before the first clinical episodes occur. And from a clinical perspective, these findings support the use of low-cost wearable devices for large-scale and long-term cardiovascular monitoring. But from a practical standpoint, these also facilitate the implementation of preventive and personalized care, where patients at risk can be identified before a clinical event occurs. As in many research work, several limitations should be acknowledged. First, the availability of large and diverse annotated databases remain limited in this field, urging the need for larger and public accessible databases to perform fair and better analysis over the previous aforementioned works. Secondly, deep learning models require interpretability tools, such as GradCam or Line, to better understand the physiological patterns they capture against the traditional machine learning methods. Third, prospective validation on real patients and wearable data will be necessary to confirm clinical applicability, which represents a natural next step for this line of research. And finally, although these models may be computationally demanding during training, their deployment is relatively efficient, which facilitates real-world applications as well. So the next step after this thesis is to validate these methods in real-world conditions. The goal is to move from controlled datasets to large-scale real deployment in hospitals and home monitoring scenarios or settings. And this will allow us to assess clinical utility of the constructed tools, as well with their robustness and scalability in the true field of application, which is large-scale monitoring. In summary, the major goal that drives this work is simple. If we can continuously monitor cardiovascular dynamics, detect early alterations, and personalize risk assessment, we can intervene earlier, smarter, and more effectively. And this transition from reactive to preventive medicine gives us the opportunity not only to treat disease before it appears, but also to help people live longer and better. Before concluding, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to my supervisors for their guidance, support, and trust throughout this PhD. I'm also grateful to my international hosts and collaborators for the opportunity to broaden my research perspective, and to the International Doctoral School for providing the academic framework that made this work possible, in collaboration, of course, with European Social Fund. Also, I would like to thank my family, friends, and everyone present today for their constant support and encouragement during this journey. And finally, I would like to thank the members of the examination committee for their time and attention. I will be happy to answer any questions or comments you may have. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll move now on to the discussion part of and we will start with the questions coming in board. And the first one, Dr. Adrian Luca.
Short series of questions, but first Daniele, I really like the pace you had during the presentation. Bravo. So I don't know, maybe you trained a lot before, but
Grazie.
it was perfect. So you have to say that it was very nice to listen to you. And yeah, congratulations also for the collaboration you had on the thesis, so for the internship that you had. I think I have some general questions to get your feedback on some questions that I have as well. One of them is, what do you think that cross-validation is, I don't know, leads to poor results compared with the external validation? And is this independent of the data size that you will have in your data set or not?
First of all, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. First of all, thank you for your question. The easy answer is yes, of course, data size largely affects cross-validation, but there are nuances. The low representativity of the data from AF and AF patients against normal patients also introduces bias into cross-validation. We selected a 50% test, 50% class A and class control in our dataset, in our subset from Inteligencia to train our models, because it was the most representative way to compare with previous models. However, in cross-validation, these results may be varying depending on the class representativity in this subset of training. For instance, if we select only 20% of patients in this large cohort of maybe 100,000 patients, if only 200 have had atrial fibrillation and atrial flutter, we may have better both cross-validation and external validation results, which may transfer pretty well in the deep learning case scenario to external validation. But the main differences between cross-validation and external validation is not the method per se, is how we present data to our models, which is critical.
So you'll prefer, let's say, what will be your choice? Let's say I will provide you with a large data set by single center data set, or with two smaller data sets, but from two different centers that you can do training on one data set and external validation as well. What will be your scenario? I will prefer a scenario for you.
In such hypothetical scenario, if I had all the data in the world, I would just split in 2080 maybe. The main problem here is not how many databases we have, but how many of them are actually publicly accessible to actually use them. And this is a problem in sleep apnea we deal a lot, because we need access to the data, but most of these databases, new and nurturing databases, are only available to a small bunch of researchers in the world. But personally, I will do both. I will follow the state-of-the-art guidelines, like 50-50, but I also want to try the 20-80%, which is more representative of the disease itself of atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter, sleep apnea, etc., against control patients. We don't want patients to be both with disease and control in the same way. We want to decrease the class of disease as much as possible. So data representativeness here is again on the top of that.
Okay, but if you have enough data from two classes,
yeah,
you will not be against a single center with cross-validation.
Well, that depends on how we get that data. I was assuming we were getting several databases for only two classes. If we had only one database, Essentia is a very good example on how we record that same data for only two classes. Because Essentia has been recorded over long periods of time. We are talking on a study that has been years working on this data collection. Atrial fibrillation FisioNet's database is a single source, single device, mostly the same patients, a very small cohort in variety in their population.
So that means you have a general taking your data, collecting over the time, you cover different scenarios, basically.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So then I have a question in the second chapter, because I thought that the aim of the second chapter was to classify patients with obstructive sleep apnea versus non-obstructive sleep apnea, and you found that the recurrence plot brought the best results. And my question, how do you interpret this representation? How you translate because of course when you compute a frequency, when you compute something classical from traditional approaches, you can explain to the physician what you are computing. There is no black box. But here with the recurrence plot, how you interpret this recurrence plot in the meaningful, in the clinical signal? What will be your interpretation on the recurrence plot?
Okay, thank you again for your question. So, whereas continuous Waverly transform is easier to explain to clinical practitioners, it is true that recurrence plot may be a little bit more difficult and complex to explain, but I will give the same interpretation as Nobel Mark I gives. Basically, our physiological system is human and is per se non-linear. What if you measure with a rule called linear rule, something that is not linear, that is moving around time and space? You wouldn't measure that effectively. You only will measure single spots of time that you think that are linear. With recurrence analysis, you can actually bend your rule to address those non-linearities within our biological system. That would be my interpretation for a clinical practitioner, without the need to actually explain the math behind them. Is that answering your question?
No. Yeah,
Okay.
I just wanted to see if you got enough into detail, because at the end, of course, you can find very performant methods, but when you come in front of the physician, they would like to get some insight what you are computing.
Reasonable.
So,
Thank you.
I can go in the next question, or you like Maria and Anthony asking something? How do you propose? Okay. Because I still have, I don't know, 3-4 question maximum. Then I move on to chapter 3. I didn't get the idea why your aim was to synchronize ECG and PPG, because at the end, if you do in real practice, you will not have them both sensors at the same time.
Yeah, that's true. Remember the slide I was explaining the parallel long-term work on continuous monitoring about ECG and PPG. So basically, the need for that third article was we were collecting massive amounts of data that were not completely synchronized. They may have like seconds to minutes of delay between one origin of times to another. So our proposal was, okay, how do we synchronize this as good as possible as compared to a human being actually comparing time spans and morphology as in other studies. In that moment, I was working with Noel Madwen in the second paper, and I came up with the idea well, let's use the nonlinear combinations possible between HRB and PRB. So we tested out, and we found that nonlinear methods such as normalized Newton information and recurrence analysis actually outperform the typical linear correlation and dynamic time warping methods. So that was the core of the study, the reason why we performed that study, a practical necessity.
Because this synchronization issue was, I don't know, a few years ago when the people tried to justify that the PPG brings the same information as the ECG.
Well, that statement...
No, it's not anymore an issue, so we know that from PPG we can get the same information.
Is that a question or an observation? I mean...
I don't know, both.
Okay, both. So the observation... to complete the observation, so
you just try the aim of the chapter 2 of the synchronization between ECG and PPD was just to provide a series of toolbox, or I don't know, to see which method is best to synchronize the signal, but there is no clinical interest for you to do this synchronization right now. I'm wrong or it's correct?
I think that's correct, because it's an intermediate step at the end of the day.
Okay. Because then you said that to correctly align only 52% of the patients, of the segment.
Yep.
But I didn't get the ground truth. How did you know that the signals were correct or not correctly aligned? You didn't have the ground truth.
That's a very good question. Thank you, sir. Allow me to explain. When revisiting the state of the art on synchronization methods for cardiovascular data, I only found a couple of works that actually wanted to or had the interest to synchronize ECG and PPG, because it is a recent interest for deep learning scenarios. So I couldn't find an exact absolute error rate to say, okay, this is properly synchronized and this is not. So we had to estimate with the values of, with several times of values of typical pulse transit times to say, okay, if the the distance between the selected window and the reference window is more than 0.8 or 1.2 seconds, we are going to say that is correct. But this is not a clinical assessment. This is dangerous to say. It's just a practical adjustment to compare our methods with future methods on this, because the interest is going to grow, especially because we are going to record several physiological data sources from several different sources. Chest bands, wristbands, portable ECG monitors, they don't have in the market a specific or proprietary technique to synchronize them properly. So this helps to, one, urge the scientific community to actually push this line of research, which is quite new, and secondly, also push the industrial community to allow us to synchronize better our cardiovascular data recordings.
Good. I'm really happy with your answer.
Thank you.
And then I have on chapter 4, 2 more questions. One, I don't know if you, or I would like to see your thought on the fact that, so basically you like to predict the AFib onset using the RR intervals in the preceding segment, correct?
Correct. Normal segments to predict risk, not only onset itself. The onset is another problem, but yeah, I understand there are nuances in between.
Okay, so it's the risk there, because for me it was like the 30 minutes before the onset of the AFib.
Yeah. No, in this case,
correct or not?
In this case, we are assessing binarily the risk, the presence of the risk of developing atrial fibrillation and or atrial flutter.
Yeah, but you are only at 30 minutes
exactly
away from the preceding the onset, so it's not exactly the risk for the time being. It's only the onset of the AFib. Probably you should extend.
Yeah.
Since you said that the public, this was in fact my second question, because the private database, you mentioned that it was to get the follow-up for those patients and see how many of them they develop atrial fibrillation in the next month of the recording, or they had atrial fibrillation in the past. So that will be probably next step for you.
Yes, of course.
My first question was what will be your thoughts on the fact that you analyze the RR intervals, which are ventricular activity, to predict something that is supraventricular?
Well, that's a very good question. From a technical point of view, the only thing I can answer is that with the models we tested, the hypothesis was, excuse me, let me reformulate this. I'm not a physiologist, I'm not a clinical practitioner, so I didn't come up with the exact relationship of HRV with atrial fibrillation morphologically. What I did know is that by studying the state of the art, is that there were quite a great amount of attempts to predict the onset, but also the risk through HRV. So what we know as researchers, as engineers, is that HRV-based prediction works for something that is atrial. But a possible hypothesis is that the morphology that changes over time in the auricula actually affects the way the ventricles beat. But this is just an assumption, an hypothesis I have. I don't have the relevant articles or information to make that statement. I cannot demonstrate with only HRV the behavior of the auricula, except for its effect to the ventricle, of course. If that makes sense.
Should be a directional relationship between ventricular and atrial, because they cannot live independently, that is clear. But I suppose that in the 30 minutes that you analyze, there are some premature atrial contractions.
Yeah.
Premature atrial beats, which makes that you have higher variability in the RR intervals just preceding the atrial fibrillation, because you need these premature atrial beats trigger to
Yeah.
initiate the supraventricular arrhythmia, which makes that probably, I don't know, in the next step you can check how many premature atrial contraction you have in these 30 seconds or 5 minutes that you analyze. Probably you have some of them. It makes like the RR interval variability higher than the normal subjects.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your guidelines as well.
Yeah, I think I'm done with the question. I think I have only one last question. Did you enjoy the Iași and Bucharest in Romania?
Sorry, did I enjoy where?
Did you enjoy the conferences in Iași and Bucharest in Romania?
Oh my! I wish I were physically in Romania, but unfortunately I was in front of my computer remotely attending the conference. But yeah,
okay.
I wish I was there actually. Thank you.
Because I'm original from Bucharest.
Oh really? Did you attend?
Yeah.
Oh, it
So
was
I'm
fun.
the Romanian origin.
I remember Constantin, of the faculty of IASI. He was a really nice person.
Yeah. Good. I'm done with the question from my staff.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Congratulations again for the nice work.
Thank you.
For Luca and the questions for Daniele.
First of all, congratulations for your work.
Mm-hmm. See?
And also to your supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
The publications are a clear indicator of the scientific quality of the thesis. And also congratulations for the presentation, because it's not easy to sum up all the work you have done in 40 minutes.
Thank you.
So I don't hear anymore, Antonio.
Hi, can you hear me now?
No, it's good.
Looks like yes, now he can hear you.
Okay, so I will start with the questions about the first two studies, because in these studies you are trying to detect sleep apnea,
Mm-hmm.
and the window size you chose was 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
This was curious for me, because in the introduction you state that low frequency band have information about apnea, and also you compute very low frequency futures. Do you think that, the first question, 1 minute, is it enough to capture very low frequency information? And the second question, if the low frequency is important, why not to increase the window size to improve the resolution in this frequency band?
Thank you very much for your questions. And well, I'm trying to sum up this. Reliable HAV analysis, at least for sleep apnea, is 5 minutes. Not only because of the frequency, of course, because also for geometric interpretations that are to be made only with 5 minutes. There are works, notwithstanding that they use even 5 seconds length. But those works, I didn't even include them to my first review, because I wanted to analyze the real impact also had in frequency. What they came up with 5 seconds, 10 seconds, is that sometimes in those frequencies, I get not a numbers results, basically, because I don't have enough span to perform frequency analysis, reliable frequency analysis. So for question number 1, well, if 1 minute could be the limit in the case of sleep apnea, but 5 minutes will be the ideal to perform quantitative comparison with previous state-of-the-art studies, which would be a fair comparison to my standpoint.
Okay, because 0.003 hertz.
Yeah, sounds crazy, but it also happens sometimes.
Okay. Also curiosity.
May I ask you the permission just to leave 1 minute and grab of water?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, 1 minute.
Also a curiosity about database size. Already Adrian asked that. don't we have larger databases that are
public database, but it requires you to be qualified as a researcher to access that database. So they tell you it's public because yes, you can apply for its availability, but you have to pass an exam. But what they don't tell you is that you need an HIPAA certificate that costs from 3,000 to 6,000 euros.
Okay.
So in order to pass that, unless you have an organization, there are universities that pay for the researchers, so they have just publicly available. They have one clinical practitioner that has the certificate, and so the only thing he has to do is deliver like the permission and the advertisement that they for what they are using that database. That's it. I would like to access that database. I'm on the way. I'm saving. So basically, that would be a very great source of information for the studies presented here. Yes.
I was curious because I found it some years ago, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. Let's go to the third study. I will start with the window size here too, because one of the limitations is the computational burden of these nonlinear methods. So if we lengthen the window size, I guess that we have a higher computational burden. But if you choose a shorter window size, the computational complexity would be lower. Did you consider this? Did you test something?
Yes, sir. Thank you again for your question. So the window size and the computational burden. Increase window size, we also increase computational burden. Alas, we have this analysis is not meant to be performed on mobile devices, but in different time on a server. So computational burden is not completely a problem itself. However, it is true that if we shorten the computational window, we also shorten the time, but we increase the risk of not finding a correct way to synchronize two signals. So there must be a balance between computational burden and time window in order to perform feasible span research on our signals. Take in mind, we are taking as a reference an HRV from the ECG, which is a quite easy step. The difficult step is actually, as you said, compute the bidimensional representation of the three-dimensional or n-dimensional phase space representation of HRV, or in this case, PRV, and then do that on every single bit of our signal. And that is outrageous. My graphics card was basically fused if I spent too much over than 10 minutes. That's why we selected 10 minutes in order to make a feasible and reasonable research on a topic that was emerging, basically. There are not many works that want to synchronize electrocardiography with fotopletismography.
Yeah, I think that it's an important problem because one of the applications that it may have is just you can select the heart rate variability or pulse rate variability depending on the noise. So one of the real-world applications is to apply your method when you have noise or gaps.
Yes.
I didn't get something here because from your manuscript, I understand that you discarded those segments, which is fair enough to test the method.
Yeah.
Then in the doctoral thesis, you claim that the recurrence plots are more robust to noise and gaps.
Yeah.
Why?
Allow me to explain. Okay, recurrence plot compared to other methods is independent on the sampling rate because you don't need to resample HRV. So the defense against noise has to be more elaborated than that. Maybe in the presentation I haven't elaborated enough. It is more robust to noise in this specific context. Basically, if we have PPG is more prone to have morphological noise. Imagine missing bits that the cross distance matrix can overcome. So as we are assessing similarity between images, a perfect diagonal recurrence plot against cross distance matrices, we can compare not only how similar they are, but also how many nonlinear and pulse noises are present in that signal, in that window.
Okay, so when you talk about noise, you mean the a real
in
world
the
application.
yes, in the context of detectability of PRV and HRV, which is our limit. We don't go into the morphology of PVG and ECG.
Okay, thank you. Also, something that came to my mind, and I'm 100% sure that also came to yours. One of the challenges of this study is to correctly validate the methods.
Yeah.
So, didn't you consider to use synthetic data or manually introduce a lag to a PPG that you can visually say this is 100% correct, just to test?
Like data augmentation. Yeah.
So,
Yes, honestly, I didn't came up with that idea earlier, but if I did use data augmentation, I might uncontrollably overestimate the quality of the detector of the alignment, basically. But yes, using synthetic data to, I don't know exactly, improve the results or see a specific result per se.
see a specific result.
Okay, that would definitely a new line of research, of course.
Because the only way to evaluate is to see if the lag is less than 1.2 or 0.8 seconds.
Yeah.
But one of the questions that came to my mind, okay, your method is performing better than the linear correlation.
In this context, in the same scenario, yes.
But if it produces, for example, more outliers, is it worth it? Did you analyze the lag distributions
now I
provided
understand.
by both?
Oh no, I didn't do that, but definitely I will do that. Yes, because imagine we have premature atrial contractions. These were healthy subjects at the end of the day, but that will definitely vary the both HRV and PRV, because those atrial premature contractures are more difficult to detect for our HRV or RR detectors. So yeah, wondering if that will influence in the final results. But I have a hint, maybe nonlinear constructs, because they have a larger window span. So if there is any change, until that change actually influences into our recurrence plot, we need time. So linear correlation measures snapshots, but recurrence patterns measures tendencies, trends. So what we expect to see is a consistent overperforming results. But yeah, definitely, thank you. I will review that.
Thank you. And the last question about the third study, then we will go to the fourth one.
Yeah, sure.
Do you think that this method is easy to extend to synchronize more than 2 signals?
Okay, that's a difficult question, pretty delicate. Okay, for the application I was designing this for, probably not. I mean, telephones still don't have sufficient computational power to do that in real time while recording. The plan is doing it on a server in a different time. So basically we don't need to perform such computational burden real time. We just issue the data to our servers, we process that data. In that service we know how much synchronization probability we have, and then we let a further algorithm choose if that is valid or not, which is the future line of machine learning part. So the simple answer will be no, of course. Computationally, it's very hard to implement it. Keep in mind, there are images calculated on n-dimensional, let's say, cubes or constructs that are not easily implementable directly in a graphics card in this case. Only images are prone to.
Fair enough. So you apply the continuous wavelet transform, and the resolution of 600 gives you the best result, in some scenarios at least.
Yes.
I have 2 questions here.
Okay.
The first one, do you think that 600 is enough to represent 30 minutes of ECG, which may be around 2000 heartbeats. And also, besides, you can see that the best results are with 600. Why not to try higher resolution?
Yeah. Okay.
Did I understand correctly? You just use one image for 30 minutes.
Yeah, for both 30 minutes and 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yes. So, where we selected 600 to represent as images those HIV representations in our work. Did I understand well?
Yeah.
Okay. This has a double source of answering. The one is to be compared with other methods in the state of the art that basically did the same. And 600 was, for 5 minutes at least, one of the most recurred scenarios. In the case of 30 minutes, we couldn't find an exact image size to analyze the HRV from ECG in normal sinus rhythm completely. I have a table, I remember do have a table in the fourth paper that compares some methods. In this case, we selected 600 to overcome the model morphology in the two case scenarios. 600 was selected first in 5 minutes, in this case, because of FusionNet's atrial fibrillation databases. Many works selected this particular configuration. So we wanted to be consistent in other scenarios. What we saw is that actually was consistent, but not only because of using 600 pixels, but because of the multi-source. Take in mind, in 5 minutes, is less likely to have premature atrial contractions and premature ventricular contractions than 30 minutes. So basically, to answer your questions, 600 pixels was just a rigorous way to set a reference to other works. But of course, in a quick workout, about 80 beats per second in a normal person, 30 minutes, if you take 2000 beats in only 600 pixels, is difficult to represent. But in the case of recurrence, selecting the proper window, we can summarize that information. I think there is a couple of experiments in which we can see that actually recurrence plots work a little bit just slightly better than continuous wavelet transforms. In the discussion, we say it might be because of that. However, that last statement needs to be also clinically reassured.
Okay. Also, for the 5 minutes window, in the paper you say, and here too, at least 30 minutes before the event.
Yes.
But how long go finding that? Because it's not the same trying to predict atrial fibrillation 1 day before or 1 hour before.
Of course.
Maybe I missed the detail of the distribution of time to onset.
It's actually how that is easy. In atrial fibrillation database, that is not easy because we only have 30 minutes. So in that case, in the paper, we only took the first 5 minutes in the 30 minutes scenario. And that's a limitation we state also in the paper. But basically, what we want to do is represent a scenario, not detect the onset of a specific behavior, which has its nuances. For instance, I only wanted to reproduce the state of the art, and as always, as in the apnea works, propose new models and then compare them with the state of the art. But in this case, João Pedrosa advised us to use 5 random minutes. And this is critical in Essentia because we have more than 70 hours of recording, so we have plenty of time to select them. But most importantly, more important than which one of them we select, is the clinical history of these patients. Because in general, it's the same if you have a subject, not a patient, at risk. If you measure it now and you measure him in a couple of weeks, he's going to show more or less the same risk because he's actually at risk. But a healthy patient will not deliver any sign of cardiovascular risk itself because what we are analyzing is normal sinus rhythm. Yeah, the distance from the episode itself may vary, but healthy subjects can also have premature atrial contractions as well. So in this case, we are using control subjects that we knew that in clinical history they didn't have any cardiovascular issue. I think in Essentia was 2 years back. And in patients at risk, we were exploring this 30 minutes as a reference as well, because we already knew they were at risk. So in this case, the temporal distance between the 30 minutes we choose and any AF or AFL episode was justified by the fact we already knew the risk of the subject itself prior 2 years ago.
30 minutes?
Well, yeah, specifically that's true. Noise. Okay. In order to make it as reproducible and feasible as possible, in research it is very typical. We only take 30 minutes of very clean signal. So we had to make a very thorough exploration of all the database to perform this kind of analysis. We only found, I think, 400 and something subjects that were at risk under that condition, that they had 30 minutes clean normal sinus rhythm recordings.
Okay. Mentioned that in control patients, know that they didn't have any cardiovascular disease 2 years before.
I'm not sure if it was 2 years or something, but yeah, more or less that.
But do you have it for years later, let's say?
Oh, that's a good question. I think Essentia is not updating their databases, but there are alternatives that they're actually doing. I think it was Cardia, and Physionets is working with them to perform a how does this say, cross-sectional study long term. They are updating this data over time. This was a couple of years ago, so now it is very likely that if we apply the same experiment, we can have we can find new how to say this, we can find new highlights, new results that actually could explain this, let's say, mechanical behavior within the HRV.
The footprint, say 1 month before.
Yeah.
Another study. Okay. Last question. And in your fourth study, regarding the validation strategy,
okay,
you say that you use tenfold.
Yes.
But then you say that you use the 80% data
to validate.
So what you are really doing is tenfold.
Excuse me, sorry. 80% to train, 20 to validate.
To train, sorry.
To boost.
To train and 20 to validate.
Okay, yeah, I see, more or less.
Tenfold should be 90 and 10. So you are basically doing training and test 10 times.
In each fold?
Or what's the procedure here? Because as far as I understand, you use tenfold, validate your models, and then you have an external data set.
Yes. Well, okay. This has also nuances. I understand the last study is technically complex and large. I mean, I think it's the most extensive article we have written to the moment. So I don't have the exact data now, but this is something I discussed also with Reina and Joao Pedrosa. The idea was, okay, if you want to test cross-validation, do it this way. You have a single database. We have stratification of patients, so the signals of the same patients don't go to specific subsets or folds in the 10-fold cross-validation. If we use 10-fold, in each fold we again divide, okay? And this is, I know this is difficult also to explain for me because validation and testing are not the same. Okay? Validation is inner in order to adapt the curves, and test within that fold is not external. Other people take the three at the same time. In the same cross-validation, they implement the external validation with a test drive. Yeah, in a couple of apnea detection models, Atria and Mojave more specifically, they also use 10-fold cross-validation with external data sources within the cross-validation per se. It's a practice, it's not very largely use practice, but it exists.
Okay, so you use tenfold and then you divide it for the earliest topic.
Exactly, because these are deep learning models and they can take longer than machine learning ones.
And after this, select the best performing fold for the test.
Best performing or the average? Yeah, it has to be the best performing to have one model. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, this also is used. May produce some optimal bias. It's called. Why did you use the best fold instead of the mean of the 10 models with the practical use? Because if you use the mean of 10 models, you can have a better estimation of the probability, and then you compute the ROC AUC basically, and you can have an uncertainty metric.
Exactly.
So why are you using the best model instead of the mean of the 10 models?
Okay. Yeah, occasion here. We select the best model only to compare cross-validation results, but in order to train for the external validation, we use the whole database. So we do 80 and 20% training, and then we test that to use all the data, basically.
Oh, okay. So you retrain the model with the...
We train from ground zero.
Oh, okay.
That way we have a better representativity of the database we are training on. Because if we only use cross-validation, we are only using one fold. We are only using 80% of the data, and then yes, it's practically like that, but with another seed in this case. In this case, we do not test within the fold, we only validate for the external validation. So we train Inteligencia, we use a small amount for validation, and then we test on an external database. Whereas in cross-validation, we train, we validate, and we test within the cross-validation procedure.
Okay. I misunderstood this in the paper because here
I understand this is
common practice is to say, okay, I have 10 models in the 10 fold.
Yeah.
So I will compute the probabilities of 10 models and I compute the mean. So you don't need to retrain the model, and you can use the standard deviation
as a guide. Yes. Maybe this is more technical, but yes, of course.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you.
Well, I would like also to provide congratulations for the work that has been done. I like the document that I received in March. I think very well organized, and I think that quite have able to summarize everything in 5 minutes, and have been able to explain it quite. Have been able to understand. So congratulations, congratulations, directors, who will, I think, that have something to do with the final work too.
Yes, of course.
So I also have some curiosities today, with being the last one to pose the questions, is that some of the things that I had written have already came up here.
Sorry, what?
Dr. Elola and Dr. Luca have already
covered the questions.
Covered the questions that some of the questions that I already had. So I would just a few curiosities. The first one regarding mostly papers 1 and 2, but there's some issues that can be one. That have you had any problems when training with the databases, the public databases you have, especially when training large amounts? And when you have public database, sometimes
yes.
What has been your experience with that?
Well, my experience with that, it wasn't that dramatic, because as we apply segmentation, we extend the amount of data we could have. As for the first paper, I do remember we have at least 40,000 hours of segments, sorry, 40,000 segments of apnea episodes, of observations, and translated that into images is particularly, let's say, straightforward. But the data representativeness of those segments, it is of course subject to that kind of discussions. Why not more? Why not less? Why not ultra short? Those kind of questions also flower when you try to train those kind of models, especially in deep learning models, in which you don't have control on how the total control, let's say, on how the features are extracted internally.
I have also a question. When you use the recurrence plot map, and you use the jet color map to take those those data into images and to represent them, calograms and maps. I don't know if you have. There is any reason for that? If you have tested any other color map? Or?
Thank you for your question. You know, I was young and wild, and I just wanted to represent the same thing others did in order to compare in a fair way. Now, I will use another strategy. Instead of colors, why not using a lightweight network that actually uses only the power, which is black and white, and from 0 to 255 values. That will reduce dramatically the size of the input side of the network, and also would make easier to analyze recurrence plot. In the case of continuous Weber transforms, the story is different, of course, because time frequency needs those colors, according to some papers, to analyze better the signals in between. But I have done experiments with monochrome representations for both continuous Weber transforms and recurrence maps, and colorful with JET 128, I think it is the standard from both MATLAB and other studies, to analyze the same continuous Weber transforms and recurrence matrices, distance matrices. So that would be the only wall to overcome when it comes to first train a deep learning model. Yeah.
But sometimes transforming the data into and then color images comply with the memory having and color. But what there are several questions. I don't know if this bring up new hinder.
I agree.
Data and just curiosity.
Thank you for your question.
And regarding the fourth article, regarding that article?
No, not yet. Not yet. We still have to wait.
And I'm also curious about the.
Okay.
We have been talking about that, but I can get to future work on.
Yes.
And well, I don't have so much hard analysis. And me, when I was I will apply it. It could be either something signals that somehow predict the risk of
interflation,
or any kind of disease. Maybe a hesitation that have
Any symptom?
any symptom or
yeah.
any episode, and first,
They develop.
yes, have a sudden heart attack, and don't even know why or there was no. And so I was thinking if this could be applied in
Yeah.
trying to reveal that or predict.
Thank you very much for your question and valuable observations. I've been repeated several times that this could be applied more largely to prevent. In this case, this thesis is limited to detection and prediction, but the main core of the thesis in a future line is, of course, applying it to identify the threat before the clinical event occurs, such as heart attacks and so on, and not only for arrhythmias, of course. The idea of the parallel work with wristbands and chest bands is precisely that. Can we apply these modern methods to these new home-based real data to actually predict that risk? That would be the question of the century, basically. We are on it.
Well, okay. So but I believe that one of the slides was regarding the report, and first thing was extending it to other with people from places.
That's a good one. We wish we had the same equipment for all. In the early stages of the study, we are working with the team. We are using the same equipment for our recordings, except for a specific case, which is, I think, in the stroke unity of several hospitals. They are using clinical grade halters, not only wearables, which is, of course, reasonable. But for the home-based, we are using wristbands and smartwatches, and we are trying to apply these algorithms to our own real-world scenario database. That will be a combination of this thesis, I think.
I don't know and what's the regarding having data from wearables and comes to
the primary care
and primary care and said, oh, I have a wristband, and said,
okay.
I am at risk of having contact.
Wow. That would be a completely new thesis. It's not only how we operate with our algorithms, but how we transfer this value to clinical practitioners. As you may already aware of, clinical practitioners normally are reticent to implement immediately the new trend on technology. I had the opportunity in Hospital do Espinho in Portugal. I have been invited into a quick project on analyzing Samsung-based ECG and PPG signals, and I found it surprisingly. I find them surprisingly interested in implementing a way to perform actually that, to have someone, a subject, come into primary care and with that data, having the tools to analyze that data. And they selected Samsung because it was one of the most prevalent market size in the world. And it was a really interesting experience from which I learned a lot that I want to apply to ours.
I'm aware that my term and not easy. Don't I have any questions?
Right.
That some of the questions have had already a listening. I don't know if there is.
Panoramic function.
Is there any proposal? Well, so now the session goes to the public one and going to
Excellent. Yes, I'm on it. There it is. Thank you very much for your time.
Voy a pedir que me ponga el cable ahora sí, que no corremos el riesgo de la conexión.
vale.
Okay. Yes, please tell me where to look at myself. Maybe here,
That's fine.
or here, so that Adrian, Luca also can hear me. I don't know. Or...
Adrian can hear you.
Perfect.
Yeah. I don't see, I cannot cannot see the student, but the candidate, maybe at the end we can activate his computer as well.
Yes, I can.
Thanks.
Okay. I can.
Okay.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, after this operation, we have decided by maximum qualification that we can get out as excellent and congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So, well, maybe.
Hello, Luca. How are you?
I don't hear very well.
What about? Okay.
Good, no.
What about now?
Well, congratulations, Daniel, for the nice work. I hope you will continue the work. I don't know. I heard that in Spain it's difficult to get into academia, but I think you have a nice profile for academia.
Thank you very much. Means a lot for me. Thank you again.
Bye.
See you soon.
So, Luca,
Yeah.
we will close the session now. You agree? And if you have any questions, just mail me about the
Yeah,
paperwork.
we'll keep in touch. So it was a pleasure to be with you today, and
Same
keep
here.
in touch for finish the document.
Same here. Pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye bye. Have a
Have a
nice
nice day.
afternoon. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.